Hi, I'm Will from Global Geckos. On today's episode of Reptile Basics, we're going to be introducing you to the corn snake. So corn snakes are they're a colubrid in terms of their approximate size. They will grow anything up to, some of the literature will say 6 foot. I think 6 foot is a little bit of an exaggeration. I would say 5 foot is just about acceptable, but I would say the majority only tend to reach somewhere between about 4 and 5 feet. So that's sort of 120 centimetres to 150 centimetres. At this sort of size, we would still class them as being a relatively small pet snake. They're certainly not very heavy-bodied either. As I said, they're a colubrid, so it's more the boids, which is like the boas and the pythons, that tend to be a bit heavier set. These guys, they're long and skinny. That's probably the best way of thinking about them. In terms of their general longevity, they're going to live approximately 20 years. Certainly somewhere between 15 and 20 years is a good sort of general ballpark for a corn snake. And in terms of how long it takes them to reach that kind of adult size, often when you first get a corn snake, you would probably get it considerably smaller than this. It might be somewhere between sort of 6 months and a year of age, at which point it may only be sort of like 2 feet long, 60 centimetres, and not much thicker than a pencil. It's going to take them probably 2 to 3 years at least to reach full size. I would say that by the time they're about 5 or 6 years old though, they should be full size like this male here. Corn snakes would originally be native to North America, to sort of the southern and eastern parts of the United States. And in terms of where they're naturally found, they're often found in anything from open sort of grassland through to forested areas. But these days they're often associated with farmland and often sort of like human habitation as well. So because they would often be found hunting small rodents and potentially even birds as well, it's quite common that people would find them sort of in outbuildings and barns and things like that, close to where people live often, where they can be found hunting for food really. In terms of where they live, they certainly have a great capability to climb, so it's not just sort of down on the floor that you would find them. You would often find them up in trees as well, and potentially they'd be venturing down burrows too. So they're quite an adaptable species which will often forage in a multitude of different environments. The captive environment for corn snakes, again, you should be looking at recreating kind of their natural environment. In terms of the size, a minimum should be sort of a 48 inch by 18 by 18, so that's 4 foot by 1.5 foot by 1.5 foot, or 120 centimetres by 45 centimetres by 45 centimetres. That said though, larger is always better, and these days I would always like to see corn snakes kept in something with a little bit more height as well, just to provide them with additional options for climbing. So certainly if you could go sort of 2 or maybe even 3 feet high for them, that's always going to be beneficial, and you will see them use a full range of their sort of like climbing capabilities if you give them that vertical element to their environment as well. When it comes to heating and lighting for corn snakes, heating can be provided either through the means of under-tank heat sources such as heat mats, or overhead heat sources like incandescent bulbs, ceramic heaters, deep heat projectors. Whatever you choose to use though, you do want to make sure that it's controlled through a thermostat. The warmest point in their environment should be in the low 30s, so between sort of 30 and 33 degrees centigrade. That's the warmest point though. You should also provide them with a variety of temperatures throughout their enclosure, so that towards the cool end it should be down no more than sort of about 25 degrees at the cooler areas, so that it gives the snake the option to thermoregulate by moving to different parts of their environment. From a lighting perspective, they are a diurnal species, so they would be active during the daytime, so it's certainly beneficial to provide them with full spectrum lighting, such as the Arcadia Shade Dweller range, where it provides a low level of UVB as well as beneficial levels of UVA and visible light. So that's what we like to use with these guys. One point of note though is certainly with a species of snake that has the capability to climb like a corn snake, it's always essential to use a guard over both your heat source and your lighting source, just to ensure that your corn snake can't climb up and accidentally burn itself on any of the lighting. When it comes to decorating the internal enclosure for your corn snake, we like to use as much of a naturalistic approach as we can, so we often use a semi-dry soil as the base. We may incorporate a few hardier live plants, and we'll then team that with plenty of branches and lower lying hiding places such as either artificial resin hides or some of the nice bits of sort of like bark and sort of like wooden tunnels and things like that for them to hide in. Often it can be nice if you add things like leaf litter or maybe some areas of moss, just some other kind of environments for your corn snake to go and forage through. It's all good environmental enrichment, and we often provide them with a slightly more humid micro habitat as well within their environment. So we'll often provide them one hide which either has dampened coir or dampened moss within it, just so that they've got that area of localized high humidity, which they'll often use, especially when they're coming into shed. So it just helps them to ensure that they can shed their skin a little bit easier. From a dietary perspective, corn snakes are pretty easy to feed. They're not exactly a picky species. In the wild, they would eat almost anything that they could get hold of. So that could be sort of rodents, that could be birds, that could be amphibians, certainly smaller reptiles. There are incidences of cannibalism known within them, so they would potentially even predate their own species. But certainly in captivity, they're quite easy to feed, as they will readily take mice, rats, day-old chicks. So often we tend to feed them predominantly on mice. When they're young, we tend to feed them once per week. As they age, so once they're reaching sort of more maturity, we tend to reduce the feeding frequency down to once every 10 days and then down to once every fortnight for adults, just to ensure that they don't get overweight, which can be a problem with captive reptiles. From an interaction perspective, corn snakes are one of the most popular first pet snakes because they are relatively placid. So in terms of sort of like picking them up and handling them and things like that, so long as you're respectful, and you should always try and support the body in as many places as you can, this helps the snake to feel secure, but they're not known to be particularly aggressive. They can be slightly defensive when they're young, so it's not unheard of for them to potentially do a little bit of tail rattling or even strike from time to time if they're feeling particularly unsure, but they're not known for their aggressiveness, and certainly if they're handled regularly, then they can be a really quite a tame sort of pet species, and they're quite tolerant of human interaction and sort of being handled. So that's all we've got time for today with the corn snake. We hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, don't forget to hit like and to subscribe to our channel. If you've got any more questions or any other statistics that you'd like to know about corn snakes, do just drop us a message in the comments.